What happens when Hollywood's most beloved action hero meets late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Arnold Schwarzenegger sits down for what should have been a routine promotional interview, only to find himself trapped in a verbal battlefield that would leave audiences speechless and social media exploding with outrage. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in the most shocking late-night television moment of the year. The atmosphere in Studio 6A was electric as the cameras rolled for what everyone expected to be another typical celebrity interview. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Austrian oak himself, had agreed to appear on Jimmy Kimmel Live to promote his latest environmental documentary, a passion project close to his heart about climate change activism. The 76-year-old former governor walked onto the set with his characteristic confidence, waving to the enthusiastic audience who erupted in cheers and applause. His imposing frame, though softened by age, still commanded respect as he settled into the guest chair across from Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel, dressed in his usual dark suit, flashed his trademark grin as he shuffled through his note cards. The host had built his career on pushing boundaries, often at the expense of his guests, but tonight something felt different. There was an underlying tension in his demeanor, a sharpness to his smile that suggested he had more planned than the standard. Promotional questions about Schwarzenegger's documentary work. Arnold, great to have you back on the show, Kimmel began, his voice carrying that familiar tone of false warmth that regular viewers had come to recognize. I have to say, it's interesting timing for your environmental documentary. I mean, here you are, preaching about climate change. But wasn't it just last month that you were spotted driving one of your Hummers to a Starbucks 3 blocks from your house? The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the lighthearted opening they'd expected. Schwarzenegger's expression remained composed, but his jaw tightened slightly. Jimmy, I think you know that I've been converting my Hummer collection to electric. It's part of my commitment to environmental responsibility. Right, Kimmel nodded, but his tone suggested he wasn't buying it. But let's be honest here. Arnold, you made your fortune in Hollywood playing characters who basically destroyed everything in sight. Terminator, Conan, Predator, not exactly the resume of someone who cares about the environment. Isn't this whole green activist thing just a little convenient? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Schwarzenegger's decades of media training kicked in, but there was a flash of something dangerous in his eyes. You know, Jimmy, I've been doing environmental work since I was governor. This isn't new for me. I'm not sure why you're trying to make it sound like some kind of publicity stunt. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the uncomfortable moment he'd created. I'm not trying to make it sound like anything, Arnold. I'm just asking the questions that I think people at home are wondering about. I mean, you drive military vehicles as daily drivers. You've got a mansion that probably uses more electricity than a small town. And now you want to lecture us about our carbon footprint. The audience was silent now, sensing that this wasn't going according to the usual script. Schwarzenegger's publicist, sitting in the front row, looked increasingly concerned as she watched her client's famous composure beginning to crack. Jimmy, let me explain something to you, Schwarzenegger said, his Austrian accent becoming more pronounced as his irritation grew. When I was governor of California, we passed some of the most progressive environmental legislation in the country. We were fighting climate change before it was fashionable. So maybe you should do your homework before you start attacking someone's credibility. But Kimmel wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by the pushback. Oh, I did my homework, Arnold. I know all about your environmental record as governor. I also know about your private jet usage, your multiple homes, your collection of gas-guzzling vehicles. It's just interesting that you're asking regular people to make sacrifices while you're living like a movie star. The condescension in Kimmel's voice was unmistakable now. This wasn't just poor interviewing. This was a deliberate attempt to humiliate a guest who had come on the show in good faith. Schwarzenegger's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles whitening as he fought to maintain his composure. You know what, Jimmy? Schwarzenegger's voice was low and controlled, but there was steel beneath it. I came here tonight to talk about something I care deeply about. I came here to discuss real solutions to real problems. But it seems like you're more interested in playing gotcha games than having a serious conversation. Kimmel's grin widened, and for a moment he Looked like a predator who had cornered his prey. I'm just asking questions, Arnold. Isn't that what journalism is about? Or do you only want to talk to people who throw you softball questions? The studio audience was now completely silent, watching this train wreck unfold in real time. Even the usually animated crowd seemed to sense that they were witnessing something that had gone far beyond normal late-night television banter. This was personal, and it was getting uglier by the minute. Schwarzenegger leaned forward in his chair, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire set. You want to talk about journalism, Jimmy? Real journalism is about seeking truth, not ambushing guests with cheap shots. You invited me here to discuss my documentary, and instead you're trying to make me look like a hypocrite on national television. Well, if the shoe fits. Kimmel shrugged, and that casual dismissal was like throwing gasoline on a fire that was already burning out of control. The words hit Schwarzenegger like a physical blow. His face flushed red, and for a moment, the veneer of Hollywood politeness completely disappeared. Excuse me. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded armies on screen and governed the most populous state in America. Did you just call me a hypocrite on your show? Kimmel's producers were frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, trying to signal their host to dial it back, but he was too far gone now. The rush of having one of Hollywood's biggest names on the defensive had gone to his head. I didn't call you anything, Arnold. I'm just pointing out the obvious contradictions. You're sitting here in a $5,000 suit, probably flew here on a private jet, and you want to lecture middle America about their SUVs and air conditioning. The audience was shifting uncomfortably now, some people actually looking away as if they couldn't bear to watch what was happening. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a public execution disguised as an interview. Schwarzenegger's publicist had her phone out, frantically texting what appeared to be damage control messages. Jimmy, let me tell you something, Schwarzenegger's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than if he had shouted. I've spent the last 15 years of my life working on environmental issues. I've put my money, my time, and my reputation behind causes I believe in. And you're sitting there, a guy who makes jokes for a living, questioning my commitment. But Kimmel was relentless now, sensing blood in the water. Oh, come on, Arnold. Don't play the victim here. You're a politician. You know how this works. If you're going to put yourself out there as some kind of environmental crusader, you're going to get called out when your lifestyle doesn't match your message. Called out. Schwarzenegger's voice rose for the first time, and the power behind it made several audience members visibly flinch. You think this is calling me out? This is a hit job, Jimmy. You invited me here under false pretenses, and now you're trying to destroy my credibility for what? Ratings? Views on YouTube? The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Kimmel's face tightened, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely angry rather than smugly amused. Nobody's trying to destroy anything, Arnold. I'm just doing my job. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. That was the breaking point. Schwarzenegger stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward with such force that it nearly toppled over. At his full height, he towered over the seated host, and suddenly the power dynamic in the room shifted completely. Tough questions. His voice was like thunder now. You call this tough questions? This is tabloid garbage, Jimmy. This is TMZ-level nonsense. The studio fell dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut away. Kimmel, still seated, suddenly looked very small and very vulnerable as the Austrian oak loomed over him. You know what your problem is, Jimmy? Schwarzenegger continued, his accent thick with emotion. You've been sitting behind this desk for so long, making cheap jokes about people, that you've forgotten what it's like to actually do something meaningful with your life. You tear people down because you don't know how to build anything up. Kimmel's face was red now, but whether from embarrassment or anger was impossible to tell. Sit down, Arnold. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene. Schwarzenegger laughed, but there was no humor in it. You ambush me on national television, try to make me look like a fraud, and I'm making a scene? Let me tell you something about scenes, Jimmy. I've been in enough of them to know the difference between entertainment and humiliation. The host's famous composure was cracking now. He was used to being in control, used to his guests playing along with his games, but Schwarzenegger wasn't playing anymore. Look, if you can't take the heat, maybe you should get out of the kitchen. This is late-night television, not a campaign rally. That comparison to his political career was another tactical error. Schwarzenegger's eyes flashed with genuine anger. Don't you dare compare this to politics. When I was governor, I faced real scrutiny from real journalists asking real questions about real issues. What you're doing here isn't journalism. It's character assassination wrapped up in entertainment. Kimmel finally stood up, perhaps realizing that having his guest tower over him was making him look weak. But even standing, he was dwarfed by Schwarzenegger's presence. You're being dramatic, Arnold. I asked you some legitimate questions about your environmental stance, and you're acting like I attacked your family. Legitimate questions? Schwarzenegger's voice was incredulous. You haven't asked me one question about the documentary I came here to promote. You haven't asked me about the environmental initiatives I'm working on. You haven't asked me about the solutions we're proposing. All you've done is try to make me look like a hypocrite based on tabloid talking points. The tension was becoming unbearable. Audience members were looking at the exits, and the show's producers were having heated conversations behind the cameras. This was spiraling completely out of control, and everyone in the studio knew it. Kimmel, perhaps sensing that he was losing the room, tried to regain control. Okay, fine. Let's talk about your documentary then. Tell us about these solutions you're so passionate about. But it was too late for olive branches. Schwarzenegger shook his head in disgust. No, Jimmy, you don't get to play nice now. You showed your true colors tonight. You brought me here to make me look bad, and when it backfired, now you want to have a civil conversation? That's not how this works. The studio audience was completely silent now, watching this train wreck unfold with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car accident. Some audience members were actually recording with their phones, despite the strict no-recording policy. They knew they were witnessing television history, and not the good kind. Kimmel's desperation was becoming palpable. His ratings had been struggling lately, and alienating one of Hollywood's most beloved figures on live television was not going to help his cause. Arnold, come on. We're both professionals here. Let's just reset and have a normal conversation. Professionals? Schwarzenegger's laugh was bitter and cutting. A professional doesn't ambush his guests. A professional doesn't try to humiliate people who come on his show in good faith. You want to know what a professional does, Jimmy? They prepare. They research. They ask questions that serve their audience, not their ego. The host's face was flushed now, his famous composure completely shattered. Look, I'm sorry if you felt ambushed, but these are questions that people are asking. I'm just the messenger. The messenger? Schwarzenegger's voice rose to a roar that seemed to shake the studio. You're not a messenger, Jimmy. You're a bully with a platform. You hide behind your desk and your jokes and your audience, and you think that gives you the right to tear people down for entertainment. The accusation hit Kimmel like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. For the first time in his career, the quick-witted host was speechless. Schwarzenegger wasn't finished. You know what the real tragedy is here? You had a chance tonight to actually inform your audience about something important. Climate change affects everyone in this room, everyone watching at home. But instead of using your platform to educate people, to inspire them, to give them hope, you chose to play petty games. The former governor's voice dropped to a whisper, but somehow it carried more weight than his earlier shouting. I've terminated robots. I've fought aliens. I've governed 38 million people. But I've never encountered anything as small and pathetic as what you've shown me tonight. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kimmel's face went white, and for a moment, he looked like he might actually cry. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras and the distant sound of traffic outside. That's enough, Kimmel finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Security, please escort Mr. Schwarzenegger out. But Schwarzenegger held up a massive hand. No need for security, Jimmy. I wouldn't want to be in this building 1 second longer than necessary. He turned to face the audience, and his voice regained its strength. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this tonight. You came here expecting entertainment, and instead you got a masterclass in how not to conduct an interview. The audience erupted in applause, a thunderous standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Many people were cheering, others were wiping away tears, and several were giving Kimmel looks of pure disgust. The host remained seated, staring at his desk, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Schwarzenegger walked toward the exit, but stopped, and turned back one final time. You know, Jimmy, I've been in this business for 50 years. I've worked with some of the greatest directors, actors, and yes, even talk show hosts in the world. And I can tell you something with absolute certainty. Class is something you either have or you don't. Tonight, you showed everyone exactly what you're made of. With that, the Austrian oak walked off the set with the same dignity and presence he'd entered with, leaving behind a studio in chaos and a host whose reputation lay in ruins. The audience continued to applaud even after he disappeared backstage, their message clear. They knew who the real star was tonight. Kimmel sat alone at his desk, the weight of his spectacular failure pressing down on him like a physical force. His producers were frantically trying to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show, but everyone knew it was over. You don't recover from publicly humiliating yourself in front of millions of people. The applause finally died down. Kimmel looked up at the cameras with hollow eyes. "We'll be right back after these messages," he said weakly, but his voice cracked on the last word. The red recording lights went dark, and the studio descended into chaos. Producers were shouting into headsets. Audience members were talking excitedly among themselves, and somewhere in the distance, security guards were probably making sure that Arnold Schwarzenegger made it safely to his car, but the real damage was already done. In the span of 20 minutes, Jimmy Kimmel had managed to destroy his own reputation while elevating his guest to legendary status. The man who had once been the Terminator had just terminated a talk show host's career, and he'd done it with nothing but truth, dignity, and the kind of presence that money can't buy. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience filed out, still buzzing with excitement about what they'd witnessed, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a bad interview. This was the night Jimmy Kimmel learned that some guests fight back, and when they do, the results can be devastating. The show would go on, but Jimmy Kimmel's credibility was as finished as any villain Arnold had ever faced on the silver screen. The only difference was that this time, the hero had won with words instead of weapons, and the victory was all the sweeter for it.